having the car out 3 times this year, I really knew I needed to make a change. And this was something that was bothering me last year, but this year it really made itself known when I really upped the engine. I gave it new aluminum heads. It makes a lot more power now. And it's just the fact that we are hitting the rev limiter at the 1/8 mile stripe way before we've reached what kind of power that I can put down. This car is not reaching its full potential because it's just being cut off at 130 mile an hour. So I found what I needed to do to fix this. Even since last year, I knew I needed to fix this. So let's get into it. So just to start out, we got the car in the air, and now I'm gonna show you guys how I'm gonna go about things. So coming up underneath the car here, you can see from our last race, kind of was a wet day, and we got a lot of mud under here, but our first plan of attack is to get this drive shaft out of here. So we have the drive shaft out right here, and I wanted to make an important point about slip yokes. Now, I'm gonna show you what the rear of my tail shaft looks like on the inside, and then I'll describe what the difference is between these two yokes right here.
So it's quite hard to see, but if you look in there, you can see the roller bearings in there. So there's 2 styles. You have the bushing tail shaft, and you have the roller bearing, and this is what the roller bearing looks like.
Now, I actually had this black one right here in there, and it was not correct. And what's a little weird is they're only different by 0.02 in diameter. And this one right here is a hardened steel. It's a lot more hardened steel, can take those bearings. But you see, this is smooth. That has the anodizing on it, but they want these nice hardened steel ones to be smooth like this. And if you inspect it, we have no marks at all on here. This thing looks very nice. It's because it's the correct one. Now, when you put the wrong one in there, this is 0.02 too small and not a hardened steel, the bearings will start to eat into that. Look, that catches my finger. No good. So I don't want anyone else making that mistake. Make sure you know if you have a bushing tail shaft or a roller bearing tail shaft. Then it was time to take off the rear wheels so that I could get towards taking out our third member, or also known as our rear gear. Now, once these wheels are off, I'm able to remove the brake caliper, which holds on the hat and the brake rotor. Now, the brake caliper is only held on by 2 bolts, which makes it very easy to remove. So you just take those out, remove the caliper, and then the hat and rotor come off. And now you have one last thing to deal with. So once you remove the brake caliper, that rotor hat comes off, and then the brake bracket is what fastens the axle in right here. You'll see it's like kind of clamping on it. So once I remove the brake bracket here, it's just these 4 bolts. Then I can grab the axle and pull it out. So we need to get both axles out, and then we can take the third member. Now, before I could take out the axles, I have to do one of the most dreadful things that involves the rear ends, and that's removing the gear oil. Now, this stuff might just look like regular oil to you guys, but it has about the worst smell out of any of the fluids you deal with cars, and my reaction says it all. Ew. So that's what it looks like in there. When you take those axles out, you can kind of see where those splines are all the way in the back. That's where they insert into the third member right there, and that's how they spin. And once those axles are removed, you can see straight through the other side of the rear end with the third member still in there. Then it was time to remove the wishbone. Now, I had a little accident when removing one of the bolts. The wrench hit me in the face, but that is what it is. With the wishbone out, you can see that I'm able to move the rear end around. That is why it's important to have a wishbone, because it keeps the rear end square. You do not want your rear end going side to side in the car, or else you're gonna wreck, or it's gonna hit your quarter panel. So I do want to do a quick demonstration on how these wishbones work. So I have my wishbone right here, and you can see it has a 1 bolt hole here, and then it connects 2 right here to the rear end. Now, you would think that this thing would just let the rear end go side to side. Look how it can pivot when you keep this bottom hole stationary. However, When you add in the 4-link bars, that changes everything, because if you look, when this thing goes side to side, these are getting closer to the chassis. So these ends, if you pay attention, look, it has to get closer for it to rotate. Now those 4-link bars are not gonna let that happen. This thing will just perfectly keep everything square, because guess what? Those 4-link bars are gonna keep that rear end as far away as possible. So it does not allow anything to move. Now moving on, with those axles out, we can finally get the third member out. So right here we have our third member. Now this thing has a ring right there and then a pinion down in there. Now these two things have teeth that mesh with each other. Now, what do these teeth mean? Now the number is very important, as your ring will tend to have a lot more teeth than your pinion. So in my case, I have 32 ring teeth and 7 pinion teeth, and when you divide 32 by 7, you get your 4.57 gear ratio. Now what does that gear ratio mean? It's a 4.57 to 1. So to me, that means that the drive shafts will have to spin 4.57 times to get one full rotation of this ring gear right here. So I've been having an issue of hitting the rev limiter at the 1/8 mile stripe. So at 7,700 RPM, I'm only going 130 mile an hour, and that's that. So when I take this gear ratio down to a 411, which we're gonna send it out to Moser for them to do that, it will give me more mile an hour, because that drive shaft will have to spin less to get the same amount of tire output. So I'll get more mile an hour at the stripe. And the reason I'm not doing this myself is that they have come out with a new stealth gear that is a little thicker than these, and apparently somewhere in the case, I talked to Moser, they have to clearance it. So they don't want their customers doing the clearance job, so they said they wouldn't even sell me a stealth gear if I didn't send it in. And the company that used to make the gears of this one got bought out, and now they came out with this new product line, so it needs clearance. And I'm happy to not do the job, because there's a lot of specialty tools that you need. I've watched videos on this stuff, a lot of bearing preload to set, and it would just be a lot easier to just send it out to them so that I can get it back and put it in the car and go race. And when we get that new 411 in there, we should see 145 or more mile an hour passes. So there you have it. In this video, I was able to get my rear gear out and show you guys kind of how everything works, and that was my goal. I wanted to be as descriptive as possible and as informative as possible. And if you guys think there's anything better I could describe, let me know in the comments. But when I get this rear gear back and put it back in, this car is going to be totally different, especially with the converter change that I'm going to make as well. I'm going to loosen up the converter so we can still leave the line hard, because when you go down in a rear gear like this, it's going to make it harder for that engine to turn that rear end. So the looser converter I can leave on more RPM and spray it harder, and then she's gonna go. It'll flash up higher, and it should 60 foot hard and run out the back very fast. So I'm very excited for that. The next video is gonna be me changing the torque converter, so stay tuned for that. And I really appreciate you guys watching, and I'll see you in the next one.